Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Global Lens with Avantika. This is the 10th episode of Global Lens with Avantika. And this episode, we are not taking any international matter. In fact, we are going to talk about India's national security. And we are going to talk about the issue of Naxalism, extreme left wing, and how it has been curbed as also mentioned by the government by around end of March. And for the same, we have Aradhita Singh with us. Hello, Aradhita. Welcome to Global Lens with Avantika.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So let me introduce Aradhita. Aradhita is working as a research fellow at India Foundation. And she has previously also served in the office of Honorable Vice President of India. Now, her area of interest lies in national security and internal security governance and people-centered policy approach, with a particular focus on extremism and conflict affected regions. So, Aradhita, starting with our very first question and very basic question, which is understanding Naxalism. So, while a lot of people, almost everyone has heard about it in India, but can you briefly explain to our audience what exactly Naxalism is and how this term was coined and how it came in?
So, first of all, thank you for having me, Avantika, on your channel. And of course, I know that you only focus on international issues. So, I'm glad that we are shifting the focus to national issues now, especially at a juncture where the government has eliminated Naxalism. And I can say that has achieved its target of eliminating it by 31st March 2026. As for briefly explaining what Naxalism is, about 60 years ago, in a small town called Naxalbari in West Bengal, a movement arose. It was called Naxal movement, and takes its name from the origin, the place of its origin, Naxalbari. It was a movement that claimed to represent the rights of the marginalized communities, but eventually took up arms and violence as a tactic to achieve its goals and means. It was based on Mao's ideology of a protracted people's war, which basically suggested that you um, take your roots from the rural areas, gain your support and your mass support there, and then eventually take the movement to the cities to overthrow the government and its institutions through guerrilla warfare. And as we all know, it had prominent leaders involved in it like Charu Majumdar, Jagdal Santhal, and Kanu Sanyal. So, in a brief outline, this was the Naxal movement. It was a movement that aimed to overthrow the state establishment using guerrilla warfare techniques. That's a gist of what the Naxalism movement was.
Mhm. And also, little bit about how it moved from West Bengal and also moved and came to, say, Chhattisgarh, which also became a very prominent place of Naxalism.
See, I will tell you what I feel, and this is entirely my perspective. It originated in West Bengal because ideas don't have territories. They don't require arms or territories to thrive. Ideas thrive on belief systems and narratives. And if you take a narrative and you try to move it across borders, it becomes very easy. Ideas travel faster than arms. And West Bengal, I feel, was the origin of Naxal movement because we know that since independence and even before, it was the hub of academic literature. You had a great host of academicians there. And then I feel the ideology then started penetrating to other areas. So, more than arms, this was about ideology moving from state to state, ultimately encapsulating over 10 states in central and eastern India, which was then called as the impenetrable, almost invincible Red Corridor, which now no longer remains.
So, moving to the next point, which is essentially the life in the conflict zone, especially around the Red Corridor, and how was the daily life of the civilians there, and how was that impacted?
Uh, I feel like in the state versus the Naxal narrative, civilians were often the collateral damage. I believe that Naxalism, more than an armed struggle, is an ideological movement, and the locals who lived in the Naxal areas were given a story and a narrative that the state was against their very existence and their local interests and needs, which could only be fulfilled by the Naxal cadres through forming the parallel government, which they call themselves to form. And I feel like misinformation, fear, coercion by the Naxal cadres, and the belief that was ingrained in them that the state was antithesis to their existence really made the territory exist on paper, but it had no access to state resources and state amenities due to this very factor. They were told that if you build roads, if you build hospitals, if you engage in state based institutions and amenities, you are basically going against your very own people. And ultimately, the state wants to do nothing promoting your interests, and Naxals are the only ones that could actually build a good future for the locals. This was the idea that was sold to them. So life was very difficult. Basic amenities were a privilege, and every day was a struggle for them.
Okay, so this is for the locals who were essentially residing in the area of where the Red Corridor was and the Naxalism group. And what was uh, the Naxalites' stance on the government?
The origin of the movement was on the basis of the fact that they were anti-establishment. They believed that everything that they wanted from life could not be given by democratic institutions and state-run institutions. The very origins of it lies in the fact that they want to establish their own parallel governments, which they tried to do earlier in the rural areas. Then the agenda was to move subsequently to the cities and then overthrow the state institutions. This was not a quick confrontation. This was basis on time. This was basis on strategy, and this was basis on a certain goal. So the very origins is rooted in the fact that they are against any form of state and democratic institutions.
So now, Aradhita, coming to the major point, which is now government's stance on entire Naxalism. So here, India's counter-insurgency strategy, and here also I want to understand the approach has evolved over a period of time. So say when it started 60 years back to now, where it has almost it's been eliminated and it has been curbed. So how this journey has been, especially if you can tell us about the initial 50 years holistically vis-a-vis the last 10, 11 years when NDA has been very strategically and on the forefront trying to eliminate it, which they have now been able to achieve.
Mhm. Uh, so for the past 60 years, this is an internal security challenge that has plagued our country for 60 long years. That's a long, long time. And from its origins to 2025, the characteristics of the movement has changed substantially. Um, of course, in the middle, you saw phases where the movement would go down, it would factionalize, and then it would re-emerge. In 2004, there was a re-emergence of factions in the Naxal cadres, which eventually gave rise to its most violent phase from 2005 to 2010, which led to the then Prime Minister Sri Manmohan Singh terming it as the single biggest internal security challenge that was being faced by our country. This was a quote that he made. Um, Honestly speaking, from that to now, where we see our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi and our Union Home Minister Shri Amit Shah reiterating to the public time and again that Naxalism has been eliminated from our country. We are seeing a decline of the movement substantially. We have come a long way. And the biggest change in this scenario in the past 20 years has been the fact that there has been a shift from passive action to active action. I say this because of three things. If you take the strategy of the government in power, especially in the past 10 years, the past decade, you would notice three stark differences. Number one being that there has been an open political will to eliminate Naxalism from the soil of our country. This has been reiterated time and again by our Prime Minister and our Union Home Minister that we will not tolerate Naxal violence in our country and we will eliminate it. So, all the political will of the state was made clear to the public time and again. If you open newspapers, you would see it that we need to eliminate Naxalism by 31st March 2026. This is all over the media, all over the newspapers. So people were made clear that this is the agenda and we will do whatever it takes to achieve this particular agenda. Number two was the greater center and state coordination that was done to achieve this target. There was modernization of police forces. There were greater civic action programs that were undertaken by the center and the states to ensure that the narrative of mistrust and exploitation that was weaved into the minds of the locals by the Naxals could be curtailed in ensuring that greater access was given to the locals to the security forces that were prevalent there. They could understand each other and they could build an environment of trust. Of course, there were area specific developments that have taken place. There has been greater road connectivity. There has been efforts to put forward state institutions like hospitals, mobile hospitals, forward operating bases were set up there to ensure that basic amenities are available to the locals. And the third most important thing that I would like to point out is the modernization of security forces and security forces infrastructure that has been one of the primary reasons for curtailing the armed aspect of the Naxal movement. We saw the usage of UAVs in core areas like Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand, where they were not only used as passive surveillance tools, but as active combat instruments to monitor these core areas. So this has been a stark and a significant shift in the government strategy over the past decade, which has ultimately led us to this date where we can proudly say that the Naxal movement is over from the country. So yeah, this has been the stark difference.
Now, Aradhita, you mentioned about what happened in the earlier years, especially you mentioned about the time duration between 2005 and 2010,
Yeah.
when former Prime Minister had to say that this is the most challenging time that we are going through in terms of insurgency. Vis-a-vis to now, Naxalism completely getting curbed. So, are there any particular instances that you can tell us about which happened during those years vis-a-vis now?
We saw ambushes on police stations, on CRPF personnel. We saw the instance where over 70 CRPF personnel were killed in an ambush by Naxals in the 2010s. And what has changed significantly now is that several operations, such as the KG Hills operations that took place recently, the security forces suffered zero casualties and ended up eliminating the security bases, the core security bases of Naxals. That's a big deal. Having zero casualties while damaging their main base ensures that they don't have access to ecosystems that help sustain the movement. So from ambushes to successes in eliminating the Naxal cadres and their support bases, we have come a long way. So I feel like Operation Black Forest, KG Hills operations, all of these operations show that yes, modernization of security forces and greater center state coordination, but most importantly, the political will, all of these factors have made sure that we have transitioned from a phase where Naxalism was being termed as the single largest internal security challenge facing our country to now a law and order issue being localized and being limited to a specific area and a pocket in our country.
Here I would like to understand. So over time, say over time in these last 60 years, did the ideology of Maoism also decline? or was it completely done via the state and in order to maintain security?
So, in the 70s, post the death of a prominent leader, Charu Majumdar, the movement did divide into several factions. These factions obviously had their own specific set of agendas, motives, and means to achieve a certain goal. So, yes, there were factions. Ideology did decline because of police crackdown in the 70s. 80s and 90s were a phase where factionalism prevailed in the Naxal movement, but these factions soon merged together and gave rise to the most brutal form of Naxal movement from 2004 onwards to 2010, which was marked by large scale ambushes. It was marked by attacks on police personnel. It was marked by civilian casualties, basically ID blasts, all violence that you can think of was taking place in this particular phase. This was the most aggressive phase. So yes, the Naxal movement did decline. It did break into fragments. It re-emerged, which brings me to the most interesting aspect of the movement. I personally believe that any movement, take for example the Naxal movement or any movement, it does not simply die because there is crackdown, there is police crackdown on the movement. In fact, I believe that a movement can sustain itself despite facing casualties of its cadres, because again, like I said, even if one person believes in the ideology, it's very easy to eventually um take the ideology forward and gain cadre strength again in the subsequent years. So yeah, that's
Oh. Aradhita, the current government has claimed that they have worked a lot on the rehabilitation of the Naxalites and people coming from this ideology. So, how do you see that adding on to the current situation where Naxalism has been taken care of?
see, when you say claimed, I would like to say that it is an actual factual instance that they have worked towards eliminating Naxalism. Statistics. So, I personally, in the year 2025, created a tracker which basically tracked all instances of Naxalism, both violent and non-violent, that was available on open source platforms through newspapers. And that significantly suggested a decline in violent movements by Naxals and an increase in arrests and surrenders, a significant increase, I would rather say. Post these arrests and surrenders, it becomes very essential to rehabilitate the surrendered cadres. And the government, might I say, has done fairly well, very well, in fact, in doing so. You would see newspapers where there are instances of cafes being opened up, run by victims and surrendered cadres together to earn a local livelihood for themselves and to earn income for themselves. There are several other instances where you see water being provided to these people for the first time. They have running water for the first time. They have bus connectivity for the first time. Puvarti as a village was earlier only known by Hidma's name. All of us know who Hidma was. He was a very prominent leader within the Naxal cadres of India. Now, from simply being known by Hidma, now Puvarti is known by the amenities that the government is providing to it in terms of bus services, transport services, and hospitals. There has been a great action on ground and a great effort in order to rehabilitate the people who were erstwhile plagued by the Naxal ideologies and to ensure that they can sustain themselves and their families effectively, and to ensure that rising aspirations within these people make sure that they do not engage in Naxal ideology in the future, which plagues on the notions of exploitation and grievances. So they have done a great deal, and articles and newspapers and even instances on ground suggest that it's been a successful endeavor.
Okay. Just going a little deeper as to what you mentioned here, you mentioned about the violent and the non-violent tracker.
Yeah.
So, from the violent trapper, this kind of change which happened. Can you tell us a little more about as to what government did? You did mention about water and the kind of facilities government provided. A little more as to what they provided, maybe few other things that really ended up Naxalites and people coming from the Maoist ideology to change their mind and look towards a better life, a regular life rather, where they are not in contradiction with the government.
See, of course, there have been several tangible gains that were given to the people to make sure that they could lead a life of dignity with basic amenities. As I mentioned, basic amenities of water, road, transportation, etc., were provided to them. This is very, very important. But I feel the most important thing that the government currently did, and which help the people and enable the people to, in fact, move away from the Naxal ideology and the Naxal cadres and to join in the mainstream, was to give them trust. It was to give them the notion of governance. It was to give them the idea that, yes, we see you, um, you are a part of our ecosystem, and we will do everything to ensure that you can maintain your basic dignity and ensure that you get the basic amenities that is available to everybody else in the country. So the notion of justice, the notion of governance, and most importantly the notion of trust was what was the most important giving of the government to the people, that enabled them to move away from the Naxal ideology of grievances and deprivation.
So, are there still some pockets where the state's presence remains weak, or where insurgent influence could still resurface?
As of today, I would like to quote some statistics if you don't mind. In 2013, we had about 126 affected districts by Naxalism. As of 2026, according to an MHA review done in Feb, the number of districts affected by Naxalism has gone down to 7. Data does not lie. Naxalism has shrunk. We are witnessing a historic event in our country where a problem that had plagued our country for over 60 years has been eliminated. As of pockets, where I would like to make it very clear to you and your audience that the top leadership of Naxalism is significantly damaged. The cadre strength has gone down significantly. The cadre morale is low. There may be some pockets that may um, witness a few sporadic incidents of Naxal based violence, but these are mostly fragmented and reactive. For any movement to sustain itself across territories, it needs a strong leadership, it needs a strong cadre morale, and I can assure you that data suggests that that is not the case. We are witnessing a decline, and I'm sure the remaining cadres would also surrender very, very soon. So it's just a matter of time now. As for if the movement could re-emerge substantially, now I feel the battle has moved from the actual battlefield to the minds. I feel like now the second stage of the battle emerges, where we need to counter the ideology through factual counter narratives. That becomes important now.
So, what do you think is the misconception which still exists about Naxalism in the urban discourse of India? So here there are a lot of people who have just heard about it. They have not never come face to face, especially people from metropolitans and so on and so forth. And also a lot of states where Naxalism hasn't emerged, wasn't prevalent. So all those people, what is the misconception that you think they still carry, and what could be one thing or anything that you want to say to make them understand better about it?
I feel as young people who go to institutions, who go to academic institutions, who watch movies, who listen to songs, who engage in any sort of digital media or have any interaction with any sort of public group. We are not as isolated from the Naxal ideology, the left wing ideology, as you think we are. I feel like the ideology is all around us, in terms of literature, in terms of movies. We have seen several movies such as Hazaron ख्वाहिशें ऐसी, Hazar Chaurasi Ki Maa. We've seen songs such as Tu Zinda Hai, sung by popular singers who, and the lyrics of the song basically point towards a utopian ideology that the youth can achieve. It's just a matter of time, and we need to be strong, and we need to persevere and ultimately achieve justice. Um, all of these songs broadly point towards the left wing ideology, in a greater extent or a lesser extent. That is for you and I to decide. But I don't think we are as isolated from the ideology as people think we are. And that is the first misconception, that the Naxal movement only thrives in the rural setups and we are very disassociated from it. No, the ideology that sustains the movement actually penetrates the rural areas through urban setups. That is my personal belief. But of course, you have theater groups, you have movies, you have songs that point to the same. Because as young people, say below the age of 10, or say when you're 15, your mind can easily be swayed. And if you watch movies, they really frame a narrative in your head. And I feel like, of course, even though people may not pick up arms, people may not walk around with guns in the urban setups, but the ideology that drives them remains equally important in urban areas, and thus counter narratives factual counter narratives must be promoted to ensure that people are making a an opinion which is basis on real facts and not on emotive storytelling. That was my first misconception, that no, we are not as disconnected from the Naxal ideology. And the second, it taking from this, the second most obvious misconception is that the Naxal movement is only about arms and ammunitions. When you think of Naxalism, you may think of guns, you may think of men and women carrying guns, kids carrying guns, often larger than themselves. You would think of police ambushes, clashes between the police and the Naxal cadres. While that image is not very, very far from the truth, there is also another facet that you must understand, which is that the battle often also lies in the mind. The ideology that moves any movement is equally important and needs to be curtailed. Otherwise, any movement can re-emerge at any point of time and in any setup. So no, urban setups are not as isolated from the from the Naxal ideology. And secondly, yes, the Naxal movement is not just about arms, it is also about an ideological battle. So for me, the Naxal movement is not just an armed battle, it is also an ideological warfare.
Very interesting, Aradhita. So, just taking 2 points from what you mentioned. First is the factual narrative, which people should know more about. And the second is the battle of mind, the ideology that you mentioned, and that persists with almost each and every one of us. So, how do you think these two things could be put more in front of public, say the factual narratives or the information, because a lot of people are not aware of this. And the second is a lot of people are consuming all these things and they are making ideologies about it. As a matter of fact, you mentioned about theater, and I have seen people doing theater and picking up ideologies, but sometimes, rather most of the times, these are the kids, teenagers, early 20s, and most of the times they are not even aware that why we are doing so. They're just going with whatever they have been taught, or they felt, okay, this is something I lean towards.
What you say is absolutely right. And I would like to point out that things have become a little more complicated ever since we've entered the digital age, where we have access to information in the click of a second. And that becomes more complicated because I firmly believe again that the pro government, not even I would like to say that the literature that is anti-establishment exists more in number than the literature that focuses on the tangible gains that the government has achieved. um, this creates a stark difference. So, the consumption of anti establishment literature would naturally be more than the literature that actually focuses on the tangible gains of the government and the pro government schemes and efforts that have taken place in uh, marginalized areas. What we should do now is to make sure that, as your viewers, I would like to encourage them to make their opinions after hearing both sides of the coin. They must make opinions using facts and not emotions. They are called opinions for a reason. Um, and most importantly, not get swayed by emotive rhetorics, and focus on the ground realities. More often than not, people ignore the ground realities and focus on things that are more emotional, that are told to us in a very glamorized manner often. And I feel like the first thing to do is to make opinions hearing both sides and to ensure that you are consuming fact-based narratives. I feel like that is a plea that I would make to all your viewers.
Sure. I hope they will take a note of this. So, Aradhita, that all the facts that you have mentioned has given us quite a lot of insights as to what has happened and what has gone behind the scenes. So, anything that you would like to add from your perspective, something that we have missed, or something that you want to put on the table, which the audiences should be aware of?
I feel like this was a great discussion. We have mostly covered everything that a person needs to know while trying to understand Naxalism in the first layer of things. And this discussion is especially important today when we are a couple of days into the target that the government set to eliminate Naxalism. This was a very important discussion. Again, what I would like to reiterate is the fact that Naxalism is over from our country. From being termed as the single biggest internal security challenge, it is now a law and order issue that could be curtailed by security forces on ground. It need not be built into something which it no longer is. There is a shrinking morale of cadres. Yes, we are witnessing a decline. What I would like to urge, especially your young viewers, is the fact that, like I said, please engage in factual narratives, engage in the ground reality of the people, and do not fall for traps such as emotive storytelling and um, songs and theater groups that claim that the state is against the interests of the Naxals, because that has never been the case. For me, the Naxal movement was a story that was weaved into the minds of gullible youth and the young people and the people of our country who were told that the state would not be available for their needs and would misuse their local needs if they were given a chance to enter these territories. That has never been the case. As you see now, we see many initiatives and many schemes that the government is launching in these areas to ensure that people have a dignified existence in these territories and have access to facilities that the state gives to everybody in the country. They are our citizens. The state has never been antithetical to them, and we must ensure that the Naxal ideology, which thrives on perceived grievances and deprivations, it does not gain the stronghold that it did, say, 30 years ago, because now we are at a juncture where we can proudly say that the Naxal movement is over.
Thank you, Aradhita. Really appreciate you giving us time and all those valuable insights. These are the things we generally don't really come across. So, really appreciate you coming forward and telling us about the Naxalism and the movement and how it got formed and where
Um,
India stands now. For our viewers, if you found this discussion, do follow our channel and yeah, share with the people you think would benefit from this conversation. So that's it for today's Global Lens with Avantika. I'm signing off.